Hey everyone, welcome back. And this week we've got Fred and his son Daniel on the podcast. You'll probably remember Fred from our last outdoor survival podcast. And this week they're going to go over everything that goes into planning a beach camping trip. It's a great podcast and I know you guys are going to love it. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Practical Prepper podcast. This week I'm lucky enough to have Fred returning, backpacker extraordinaire. I'm sure you've listened to his other episode, which was absolutely fantastic. And at the end, we talked about how he was taking a trip with his son, Daniel, who is also joining us here in the studio. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, really good.
Great, yeah.
So I know that, like I just said, the audience might be familiar with you, Fred, from the last time. But if you guys just want to go ahead and introduce yourselves and just kind of set the tone for what the podcast is going to be.
Well, sure. So I'm Fred, and I like to walk and hike and do a lot of backpacking. We talked about that before. Hiking's just an extension of walking, and backpacking's throwing a bunch of extra stuff on your shoulders so you can get through to the next day.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love doing this. Been doing it since I was a kid. And, so I appreciate you having us back here to talk and actually, invite my son over.
Absolutely.
I'm Daniel. I'm Fred's kid, and I'm also a fan of walking and hiking. I also do a bit of running, and yeah, I'm enjoying the adventures.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you do like distance running?
Yeah, endurance running. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
He's going to be in the Akron Marathon for the first time this summer.
Yeah, the relay portion.
Oh, nice. Have you done a full marathon or you just do relays?
No, I've ran farther distances like that, but I haven't done a full marathon.
Yeah.
Before.
Well, that would be cool.
Yeah, what is the longest you ran?
16 miles.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're getting up there.
Yeah. That's close enough. You could probably just wing it and do it.
Yeah.
It's the difference.
How long did it take you to do that?
Probably a little over 2 hours.
Okay. So that day that we hiked 19 miles down in the Cuyahoga Valley, you recall how long it took us to do that?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was just a little over 12 hours.
Oh
but
my
we stopped
gosh.
and actually cooked lunch on the trail too, though. So,
Still, I mean,
yeah. See, he was running significantly faster than we were walking.
yeah.
Yeah.
Would you run ahead and double back, check
Oh
on
my
up,
God.
run ahead, run back? So my first question is actually for you, Daniel. How long have you been going on these trips with your dad, and what was your first trip together?
So I've been going on these trips for about 2 years now, and our first trip was exactly 2 years ago now, and it was a trip down in West Virginia. That for me is a very clear memory because it was very, very eventful.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, that first trip, that first true backpacking trip that we did, no scouts involved, no overnight, pre-planned destinations. We just wandered up into the mountains of West Virginia in a wilderness area. We got off trail. We got a little lost, Even with the GPS in our pockets, it's a good example of how you can get lost when things just don't go right.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these trails, when you get out in the woods, are really hard to find. They're narrow. They're encapsulated by branches and other things really close to them, and they get wet, and those branches bend over. That trail disappears, and so you could be crossing back and forth over top a trail, not even recognize that you're walking over the trail you're trying to find once the branches have leaned in a little bit.
Yeah.
And that kicked off a very interesting weekend for us. I don't recall if we talked about that last time, but yeah, we ended up putting up our hammocks in a pitch black and swinging above a bunch of bushes on very uneven ground. And
Oh yeah, you might have mentioned that.
yeah, and we had to find our way down off the side of that mountain the next day because we truly couldn't find the trail, and the forest was so dense that, damn, we were hopping over rocks and climbing under rhododendron bushes, which
Yeah, that was rough. I was getting really cut up, and yeah.
ran out of water at one point. We had the ability to filter water, but it was hot, and we could not find enough running water to actually get it in bulk to be able to filter. You might just find a mud puddle or something. It was really difficult to get the water out of. I don't know, it was stressful. We were definitely, we could find ourselves on the map, but we couldn't find our way back to a trail to be able to easily get anywhere.
Yeah, I was getting a little worried that all backpacking trips were going to be like that.
Yeah, was there ever a time during that trip of where you had the feeling of where you kind of click over of like, we might be in trouble here?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, certainly towards the end of that day, I mean, we woke up knowing just about where we were, but that we needed to make our way to a major trail route to make sure we could find a very large, obvious path to get out of where we were.
Mm.
And looking for these small, narrow, winding trails really wasn't a good objective, since we knew they were going to be hard to find, and you could cross over one at the wrong angle and not even recognize you stepped through a trail.
Yeah.
So we were fighting our way down off that mountain, and really, I mean, it was like climbing through a jungle gym the whole way down. And we're coming through. It's, one step over a branch, another step under a branch, bend over, practically crawling on the ground. Okay, now we got to climb over this. Most of the time, the brush was so thick you couldn't see your feet, and it was hours and hours of the summer heat and lack of water or even a comfortable place to sit. We did finally find an opening about halfway down that we rested and ate some food, but then we were right back into the thick of it. And getting towards dark, we realized we're in another thicket, just like we were the night before. We're out of water at this point, and we really, really need to be able to get to water fast, because I need it for health reasons. He should have it also for health reasons, but I need it even more so. I'm a diabetic, so I've got to have water. And yeah, so it got a little nerve-wracking. I would say a little scary. I mean, it was his first time out in the woods. I didn't want to send him wandering on his own, should I have to just stop everything. And we finally, right as things were getting bad, we suddenly did break through a tree line and found a big wide path that one of the main routes that we were looking for. But we were totally out of water, and we had no idea where we were going to camp. And we got lucky at that point. We said, hey, which way do we go? We could go and try to follow the main route down to an even larger path that kind of cuts through this wilderness area, or we could go opposite, kind of back up, and maybe, find a campsite sooner. And we rolled those dice and went, okay, we're going to take the trail back in the direction of the thicker stuff, hoping we'll find a better campsite versus having to really climb down off some steep areas. And we knew it was going to be a much longer hike to get to where the other campsites were, and we'd probably be in pitch blackness again by then.
Yeah.
And we lucked out, and we found an absolutely perfect campsite. And we've gone back to it several times since. We deliberately looked for this place because it's so isolated but so perfect, and it's one of these places that's tucked underneath a bunch of pine trees, and you got 6 to 8 inches of duff laying on the ground, and you could walk around in your socks or barefoot, and the ground's soft. Nice. You just don't find that everywhere.
Yeah.
And
right next to the creek too.
It's right next to the creek, perfect water source there. And we found it just as it was getting pitch black again. And we were, this was going to be another night. It was looking like we were going to be hanging and kind of uncomfortable and out of our element, And so we found, just the perfect spot. And it did turn out to be the right thing. And as we took that path the following day, so we backtracked and finally went down to the main route of that trail the next day, the other option. We had found it. And we're so glad we didn't go that way, because it turned out that trail was washed out in several spots, and it did take a long time to get down to this creek basin. And had we tried to do that in the middle of the night, there's a good chance we could have slid off, and taken a very steep fall in the dark, or just never been able to find water and trying to set up at night again without water, which that's just not a healthy thing to do. Even if you're not a diabetic like me, to go all night without water after working that hard, you need to rehydrate.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, it really was a perfect storm of a day. And
crazy.
Yeah, but it turned out okay.
Yeah,
it did. It turned out okay. The hardest part about that is the mental game. Once you get into something like that, it's going, okay, what do you have to absolutely make sure that you're taking care of? And it's water. It's making sure that you're not doing something to put your body in jeopardy and physical harm. And then managing the other resources as you go, and then you're also managing time and daylight, to figure out how far you can get in a bad situation. But keeping those things clear in your mind, like, okay, I know I have the bases covered, and if I at least have this, this, and this, I won't die. I'll likely not even get sick. I'll just be a little uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And then you're just kind of managing to hopefully get to a better and better situation at that point, Yeah. So Dan, that day when we came down, what do you remember most about that?
I think there might have been people down there, because when we get back off some of those side trails and you get down into the actual, the Otter Creek, the trail itself, a lot of people go down there who aren't even hiking really, just kind of hanging out in the creek. I think what I remember the most was just seeing other people and being I don't know, having the feeling of human connection, like seeing seeing people, because it was it was kind of scary just being out there and just by yourself and having to figure it out. So
Yeah.
that's what I remember.
Yeah, because there's like local college kids down there, and older teens that will hike 3 or 4 miles in to go to some of these swimming holes.
Mhm.
And when we finally made our way down to the main route through the Otter Creek Wilderness, that's where it's more convenient for the locals to go. They tend to not go up on these side trails or up on the mountains around there. They take these main thoroughfares through there, and then they'll even camp down in there. They have fun. These young people looking to have a good time out in the woods.
Mm.
But yeah, it was weird to come down out of that and be like, we were just slugging it through that, sweating our butts off, out of resources. And some of these kids just carried in a case of beer.
And they're looking at you like, what the hell happened to you?
Yeah. We're all scratched up and sunburned and, looking ragged. And they're like, and they're down there just swimming in the swimming holes and bathing suits,
Yeah.
But that's all right. We've done that too. We've gone back and said, hey, let's just make sure we pause in these places and jump in the water.
Yeah. That's interesting, because you got to be, like, when you're in that scenario, you got to also be thinking, like, even if I'm worried, like, maybe you don't want to show that you're that worried just because, like, it's your first trip, and you're probably thinking, like, if your parent is showing signs of, like, this isn't a good sign, then you're really going to be like, oh, okay,
yeah,
this probably is not good.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a leadership thing that you learn over time when you lead a group. If you set the tone and folks are paying attention, they'll follow that tone.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, he's my son. He's, I've got his attention, and I'm the only adult at that point he has to rely on. So yeah, there's that. I kind of navigated it verbally for him too. Like, Dan, this is what we're doing, so don't be too afraid, because we have food. We have, when we have water, we have water.
Yeah.
We know we can get ourselves up off the ground using hammocks to string between the trees. And think on the bright side, Dan. At least we didn't bring tents, because in the place that we got stuck the one night, there was absolutely no ability to set up a tent. If we truly planned a tent camp in the woods, we would have just been laying on uneven rocks in the side of a hill, like rolling around underneath bushes. It would have been really miserable.
Yeah.
So highlighting the positives was an important part of that.
Yeah, definitely maneuvering through that. Because I was, when it first started to get bad, I was not having it at all. No. So
well, it was a good learning experience.
Yeah.
Now you got the story. So it's always what I tell myself if there's ever a scenario in, I'm thinking, this is less than desirable. But when I finish this, now I've got the experience, underneath my belt.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So let's get into your most recent trip that we were talking about. What inspired it? What made you guys want to take this trip? Well, where did you go? Let's start with that, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. So we went to the state of Virginia, down into the far southeast corner. The most public access we could get into was an area called Back Bay Wildlife Refuge. And it is a place with limited ability to actually drive in and out of. And so we couldn't actually park there. We actually had to park in a neighborhood development area north of there. And then we took that down through the wildlife refuge, which is very, basically people don't go there very much unless they're just passing through or going for maybe an hour of sightseeing, that kind of thing. And then we took that to get down into the actual furthest southeast corner of the state, which is their False Cape State Park. And it used to be a settlement there. There's fishermen and farmers just living on the coast in this narrow strip of land. And that has been gone for 50 or 60 years now. There's just some remnants of that left. The reason we did this, though, is that Back Bay Wildlife Refuge has gorgeous swamplands and back bay areas that you can look at. And, if you've been on the ocean before, where we have got these narrow strips of land, you got oceanside, we got obviously all the noise and the energy of the ocean blowing up onto the shore. And then, you can walk over to the inland waters that are separated, and there's no longer that current, and sometimes it's a mix of fresh and salt water, so you get brackish water. And that water is typically much calmer. In some areas, they call it a sound, just depending on the depth of the water and I guess what the map makers wanted to call it. So that's a neat mix of wilderness there to kind of look around. And they do a great job of setting up trails. And we would go oceanside most of the time when we were there. And we've been doing this ever since Dan and his two sisters were very young, and me way well before they came along. Just walking down the ocean. There's no condos. There's no buildings. Quite frankly, there's no lifeguards. If anything, on occasion, you'll see a park truck driving by that's just looking to make sure that nothing dangerous is washed up onto the ocean, and that if someone's in distress, maybe they can be there at the right time for them.
Mm.
So we tend to not swim it. It's really about walking the ocean and just enjoying the nature of it. And those started as little trips when the kids were small. We'd walk a half a mile and come back. We'd walk a mile and come back. A couple of years ago, we finally walked, it was about 3.5 miles down it. And if you walk 3.5 miles on sand, you know that's a good workout.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and daughters at that point said, okay, that's enough. And we're not going any further on this. So we can come back here, but let's not do that again. Because, your calves are ripped after a day like that, and your feet and your arches hurt. But I knew Dan could handle it, and I wanted to see just how far this would go. Like, what happens? Does it turn into an inlet? Is there suddenly a river that comes out or a stream that comes out and breaks up the coast? Or are we eventually just going to walk into North Carolina and find, more human settlement stuff, get out of the parklands? So that was the start, the seed for that.
Yeah.
And we did some research online, found out that, you can camp down in the state park. You have to do it by permit system, which the state of Virginia is great about operating. And back in January, we picked some campsites that were very close to the ocean side, about as far south as we could get before hitting the North Carolina line. And said, we're going to use that as our base, So this is a backpacking trip in that we're going to have to carry all our stuff in, but we're going to set up and actually camp 2 nights and then explore while we're down there. Because there's the inland side and there's the beach side and there's way further south that we still haven't gone and seen. So we got to get all our stuff to this campsite, which is about 12 miles in on the hike, but then we can drop it and carry like not even half the weight the rest of the time, which is a nice convenience. And that's something we would normally do because we would camp at a different spot every night.
Right, so you have to keep bringing your stuff everywhere you go.
Right, yeah. When we do the backpacking, we're typically trying to cover a big distance, often in a loop type pattern. And so you're not really ever at the same campsite twice.
Yeah.
And this gave us some extra convenience to really be able to explore. And that turned out to be a lot of fun.
What was your total distance that you covered over how many days? Do you know?
So 3 days, and I think we put in about 45 to 47 miles.
Wow.
Yeah. We did a lot of hiking. We even did a good deal of night hiking.
Yeah.
Because we were using our days pretty efficiently and just seeing stuff and enjoying and having fun. And then we'd be out of water by nighttime, and we were able to find a good source of water that was kind of off the map, but it still required walking a couple of miles to go and get it.
Yeah.
And so we did. You get to walk around at night, listen to the birds, and really kind of soak it in. It's fun to be out at night and not really rushed, really just listen and walk and not feel like, hey, I have to be here at a given time, or I'm in a group of people that want to get home and watch TV or go to bed. You just really there's some freedom in that.
Yeah, those night hikes were definitely one of my favorite parts. Yeah, it was so empty, and there's hardly anyone you'd run into, and it was nice. The sunsets were beautiful too.
What about wildlife? I know we just talked about birds, but what else? Did you guys run into anything out there, really?
So I ran into it on the beach. I found a dead sea turtle. Yeah, and I was not expecting that. I don't think I've ever seen one in person, alive or dead.
How was the size? Was it like a huge one?
I'm not sure what average would be for a sea turtle, but
this one was a couple feet long.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, lots of birds on the land and on the beach. There's everywhere. In the sand, there was. Do you know what they're called?
The little crabs?
I always forget what they're called.
I don't know. I just know some people call them sand fleas.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right, and then walking on those and seeing them burrow back into the sand.
Isn't like looks like bubbles, like they pop up and the holes form.
Yeah.
Like when the tide pulls out.
They do, yeah. And you'll see them at a distance. You see all these little lumps, or you might see the very edge of them. They look like little white peaks sticking out of the sand. And as you get close, they'll jump back down in the holes, just hundreds of them at a time.
Yeah.
And then when the wave blows over, all that air comes out, and you get all these bubbles in the sand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's neat to watch. It freaked me out as a kid walking over those things. I'd be like, oh, they're going to pinch me, but they're so tiny, they just try to get away from you. We saw bigger crabs too.
Yeah. At night when we were on one of our little walks, we went toward the ocean, and there was all over the beach, just scattered everywhere. It was white crabs. Some of them were a lot bigger, and some of them were really tiny. That was really cool to see. You had to watch your step because they
Oh,
were just
yeah.
everywhere. That was really neat.
That's pretty bizarre. I remember when I was a kid, and I feel like it was like looking at a different planet. Like it's been so long now, maybe my mind's filling it in different, but I like remember coming over a sand dune and seeing like the moon shining off the water and kind of illuminating the beach, and there was just hundreds of crabs everywhere. Like that's their prime time. You know, I'm no expert, but that's got to be like they're hunting. I would assume the nighttime is like when they go out and they do their feeding because they are everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and they are like that like ghostly white, and
Yeah.
it's funny you say that because some of the photographs I look back, doing some like macro shots of them and stuff. You look at them and they do. It looks like they're like some sort of alien animal. They're so ghostly white, and they're on the sand, which sand's everywhere. So they really. And you're looking at the shadows. It's like, this could be on the moon or something. It's like, what is this? But it was just so cool to see them in the sheer numbers. And I think that's something that we've been on the beach before at night, but never on that kind of open beach. It was, when typically if we would run onto the beach at night, it would have been where the touristy areas are.
Yeah.
And you don't get as many crabs in that kind of space.
Mhm.
No.
Yeah, you were kind of on their turf, on their time. I wonder if I would assume that maybe the white or almost like ghostly translucent color is based off of them maybe being like nighttime hunters. That way they're not influenced by the sun. Maybe it doesn't change the pigment as much of their shells. I'm not sure.
What was that book that was written by Jules Verne about time travel? Might have been called The Time Traveler. I forget exactly what it was. It's a famous book where he creates his time travel device and he goes to different periods of time. And at one point he goes far into the future and he goes down into these caves. And there's all these subterranean, like what humans became in the future when they all had to burrow into the ground. And they're all like perfectly white because they lost their perfect pigmentation. Yeah. I think there's some of the TV shows too that show like cave spiders and things like that. They seem like they don't have pigment. It probably is related to the sun. Yeah. But you would think, well, this animal exists on the beach. In my mind, I attribute beach and sun, not beach and lack of sun. Right. These animals are obviously hiding out all day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, how was it? Like we're talking about the tide coming in and going out. What type of footwear did you use, and what's versus walking on wet sand, walking on dry sand? How's that?
This trip we opted for tennis shoes. Yeah, and that's not normally my shoe of choice, but I wanted to be able to get them on and off real quick, and I wasn't expecting a lot of like ankle twisting moments. I would normally want to wear boots for just to make sure I'm giving myself extra ankle support or protect against like rubbing against rocks if we're rock climbing or something like that. And so I opted for tennis shoes, and that ended up a good and a bad thing. Dan, you just wore tennis shoes on this, right?
Yeah, I just wore the same shoes I was using to run in at that time.
Yeah.
I think it was a good decision, but I also the one problem when you're walking on the beach in shoes is that they're gonna get filled with sand. So doing 12 miles in a day on shoes that have sand in them, it gets it's a little bad at times, but I think I managed it pretty well, and I probably would do the same thing for to do it again. Would be to wear tennis shoes like that.
Yeah,
you have the sand in your shoes, but I think like wearing like something like boots or something on the beach would just start to drag, or I don't know, get too hot or just not comfortable.
Or it's the added weight factor too. I mean, when you got all that strain on your foot and your arch, like you were talking about, and every time you lift your foot over 40 some miles for 3 odd days, you got an added 2 pounds on each leg.
Right.
Yeah. And with deeper lugs on your boots, once you start packing like the mud and sand in there, you're lifting every foot with extra junk hanging off of it. Yeah.
My worry with the tennis shoes would be like they're created to be very porous to keep your foot dry from sweat, but that also would allow water to immediately seep into the shoe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that turned out to be a big problem for me on this trip. Normally when we go, we actually will go on a backpacking trip and deliberately wear boots, okay, for the protective reasons, both, mechanically protecting, the way your foot and ankle work, but also for, hey, if something small bites at your foot, you're covered up above the ankle, or if, you're rubbing against, branches and things like that, they're going to tear you up. Or again, I think I mentioned, rubbing against rocks. getting your ankle scraped up hurts pretty good, and then rubbing against it for a while stinks. So we would take water socks or Crocs, but really water socks are great because then if you get into an area where you've got to cross something is wet, or you're going to go through something like a creek or a river that you might be waist deep, and you're really you're fighting against the current. You're fighting against something pushing on you while you're trying to keep your balance, and you can't typically see what you're actually stepping on. It could be a bunch of tiny pebbles, it could be sand, or it could be, in a lot of these cases, it's big river rocks that are the size of a table, that are tipped in different directions and have moss and stuff growing on them, and so they're slippery and not even, and you don't know where you're going to go and how to get it purchased with your foot. So water socks are a great fit for that. They give you a little bit of protection, but also give you a little bit of grip, and they'll dry off really easy when you take them off on the other side. We should have taken water socks on this one for the ocean walk. And why it didn't occur to me, I don't know. I think I just thought, hey, I'll go barefoot. And I did go barefoot for a while, but I had also walked quite a while with my shoes on. And as you're kind of navigating that border zone where there's fluffy sand and it's, you're sinking in it versus the packed sand because it's got fresh water kind of going back and forth with the waves, that packed sand's a little bit firmer. And so you kind of dance along that while you're also trying to dodge the waves that still occasionally come up. And sure enough, I eventually, got my feet soaked from that. And so I'm walking and I've got amazing socks on and I've got great shoes on, but the water's still in there. And that water softens callus and encourages, a different kind of friction around your foot. Even though you think water is slippery, it's still creating some extra rubbing in there. And with your foot softening and the rubbing, I ended up with 7 or 8 blisters. I should have just taken the shoes off. This was, total blindside on my side, just going, I'm having a good time. Should have taken them off, let them dry out, walked barefoot again, put sunscreen on your feet, which you really should do when you're walking on a beach for the amount of time we were doing because our feet normally aren't exposed to that.
Yeah.
And instead I ended up with, a bunch of blisters, pretty far from the car. So there was no easy way out of this. And quite frankly, I wanted to enjoy the rest of the trip, and good blister care, is typically when you've got some flexibility with the environment you're in. Most people would say, hey, don't pop the blister. You don't want to have an area for an infection could get in, a hole in the blister. Use stuff called moleskin, which could be a couple millimeters thick padding with an adhesive side. You cut out a piece of this, put it around the blister, then over time the blister would naturally recede, and the moleskin would keep that blister from rubbing and hurting. Well, these blisters were so prominent, and there just wasn't a way to make them not hurt. And there was plenty of walking left, and I wanted to have fun. So I had to roll the dice and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and pop these and take that slight chance of getting an infection. And that's what I did. I just made 2 tiny incisions in each blister and then drained them and then put an adhesive type of tape over them, something a lot stronger than what moleskin is. It's like stuff athletes use for putting on different wraps. And it was very water and sweat resistant. And then just taped them up. And I was surprised that once I got them drained and taped, they didn't hurt anymore. And I continued to do that for the next several days, not only while we were there, but when we went back up into the mountains on the way home and did a pretty rigorous trail up there, and my feet didn't bother me one bit. So I think I rolled the dice in the right direction that time, made the right choice. And unfortunately, I didn't get an infection or, it didn't go the wrong way for me. Because I guess it really could have.
Yeah, that could be to me, that's like the ultimate trip ender. Like even that, when you get that little abrasion, if you got a new pair of shoes on that's rubbing you right on the back of the Achilles and it takes that top layer of skin off and it's nice and bright red and angry. And then you've got to deal with that for, however long. Yeah.
And it just continues to sting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I also throw in my backpack, it's not one of my top things, but one of the other things I always keep in my backpack is that real highly adhesive medical / athletic tape. Because if I get hot spots, I just wrap them.
Yeah.
And anybody I take on hikes with me that are when we get into the longer hikes, 6 miles and up, I tell them, hey, I've got this stuff with me. Let me know the minute your feet start feeling hot, either it's the Achilles or a big toe rubbing on the inside of the boot, But just tell me, we stop. This is going to save you a ton of pain. And believe me, even if I have to stop for 10 minutes to do this, that 10 minutes is going to be a lot less time than if your foot starts to bleed and we really have to slow down.
Yeah.
So good foot care is really important. Yeah, it was kind of a dumb move on my part, keep moving in those wet shoes. Yeah. Sometimes that happens though. The best case, best planning still sometimes you get caught up in the moment.
Yeah. What about for like sun exposure? I know you were mentioning like if you do wear no shoes when you're walking, you definitely need to sunscreen up. How was it on this trip? Were you sweating and getting beat down on by the sun, or was it not that bad?
I'd say, especially when we were on the beach, the sun was pretty harsh. But I don't think I took off my shoes during the day like at all.
Mhm.
So I don't think I ever was worried about like my feet. But definitely during the day and the sun on the beach is really beating down. When you get more into the land a bit more though, you get a lot more shade, and so at times, it wasn't really a problem. It was just smart to put sunscreen on for the whole day
Mhm.
because you never knew when you were going to be out and there was going to be no trees or when you'd be in shade. So you just had to prepare for both.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you're on a long trip and wearing multiple layers of sunscreen and not being able to take baths, you can get kind of nasty,
Yeah.
because you're building up sweat and oil and all of this kind of stuff. And so you try to rinse that off and, maintain yourself as well as possible so you're not grossing out everyone you're with,
Mhm.
but in this case, we had plenty of access to water for rinsing off. So sunscreen was actually, it obviously nothing over you when you're on the beach. You're not getting any shelter unless it's from the clouds. And well, I would say, yeah, all 3 days. I mean, they were pretty stereotypical beach days that by noon that sun was hot.
Yeah.
In your next 3 to 4 hours were really the hottest part of the day. And protecting our feet, or my feet with sunscreen, I put on, like, I like to carry those aerosol bottles of sun spray. So I use that all over my head and shoulders and, in my legs. But for my feet, I put on the really like thick, gloppy, like SPF 2000 stuff. And I'll tell you though, I probably should have at one point or another stopped and reapplied because it says, hey, it'll last for hours and hours and hours, but I don't think that stuff lasts as long as it's rated on the bottle. It's probably a good idea to reapply sooner.
Yeah.
And by the time we did get off that third day of that trail, and I just got back and cleaned up, and I looked at my feet, and they were pink. They didn't tan; they were pink. And I was like, you know what? If I had missed one application of what I did put on my feet, I would have burned and swollen and hurting feet. I was that close to it. So that was a good reminder. Hey, in the future, don't forget to just stop and reapply. That bottle says you got 4 hours of coverage, but not really when you're getting waves washing over you back and forth.
Yeah.
It just doesn't hold up that well. Yeah.
With sunscreen, there was once where I went on a longer kayaking trip with my brother. We did all the sunscreen and all your regular spots when you're standing, but it didn't occur to me that you're sitting.
Yeah.
And I got sunburn on my knees bad. And I didn't realize it. We got home and I went to take my swim trunks off and I put on a pair of long pants.
Oh,
and
man.
when I pulled them up fast and I got up to my waist and out of nowhere I was like, something is extremely wrong. And it was I pull them back down, look at my knees, and they're bright pink red, very like a lobster. I mean, angry. And it lasted for a long time, probably like a week.
Yeah.
And it was brutal because even then, if you're applying aloe, it gives you some relief. But if you're wearing long pants, then you've got that feeling of like the lotion aloe in between the garments of your clothes. And
you got constant pressure because the clothes just kind of like drag and
it kind of makes it worse. It's not good. But that's one of those times where I was like, I can't believe that I didn't think of like, I'm applying the sunscreen in a position that I'm not going to be in for what I'm going on.
Yeah.
So that was
that's a great point. And I've had the same thing happen. Dan and I have done plenty of kayaking and canoeing, and because of that, like people look at me like I'm goofy when I go for hiking and I put on sunscreen. I always lift my my shorts and spray up higher onto my thighs. And it actually, when you hike, you picture as you lift your knee, it's kind of going into that bent seating position when you really step high.
Yeah.
Just pulling your short up, And I have been burned on like full day hikes. You're out in the sun, and that bright light keeps pulling up. I've been burned pretty good doing that, and that hurts. You're absolutely right. That is misery.
Yeah, it's really bad.
Yeah.
So I do the same thing every time now. I give it a little lift. Put some up there because I never want that to happen again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was awful. So what about hydration while you were hiking? What was your method for that? Did you guys carry huge containers of water with you? Did you have access to water? I think you mentioned that earlier, but
Dan, did you do anything different for water this time?
No, so I don't go through water super fast. I think on this one I did use a lot more water, but I just brought my normal like Nalgene bottles.
I think those are quart bottles. Yeah.
Quart bottle, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I knew that I couldn't cut it with quart bottles with as far between as the water is, because you picture we're on the ocean down there, and we're in pretty secluded wilderness and state park areas, or wildlife refuge and state park area. And there's really not meant to be a lot of amenities. Most people just kind of come in for a couple hours and leave. Okay. And yeah, we've got water on the back bay side, but that's brackish and you can't really drink it because it's got a mix of salt in there, And the ocean water is obviously just full of salt. You can't filter it. You can't chemically treat it. What are you going to do? You're going to distill it, or, we're not going to sit there and boil it. We had to basically know where we could get fresh water at. And when we did figure out where our sources of fresh water would be, we knew there was a couple strategic actual like park outposts that we could stop at, and they would have like a hose or something where you could refill. But to plan for that, I actually bought larger water bottles. So I think I got lucky, and I was up at REI and they had these really, really tall Nalgene bottles. And so I bought those because I knew I could fit those in the side pockets of my backpack. I'm not really big on the platypus things. I know some people love them, but I've never gotten used to having a pipe valve, and just like to reach out and grab my bottle. Plus, those are easier if I want to throw like a drink mix in those, or electrolyte powder, things like that. Yeah. So I had to plan to take a lot more water, and I'm really glad I did, because I emptied those bottles at basically every chance. We still carried a sack though for carrying water, and one of the reasons for that is when calling down to the state park, just to get an idea of the lay of the land, because it's far corner we'd never been down to before, and I really wanted to find out like what obstacles we were going to have getting water, how far we were going to have to trek, because that would determine our route planning. And just striking up a really great conversation with the ranger, she ended up telling me, hey, there's an unofficial watering spot that we're okay with you coming down and using. You got to be respectful because it's on a park ranger's, they call it his property, but his home site within the park. And this is how you'll find it, and make sure to give that person plenty of space. Don't go tramping around on their yard and stuff. But it's really totally unmarked, and you just got to know where to find it. And she told us how to find it, and that it was okay to use it. So, and it was safe, and it allowed us to strategically not have to retreat as far north back towards where we came in, toward where some of the park offices were, and stay really down into the heart of the park and be able to have clean water. And so we carried like an extra sack with us that would hold 3 liters of water. So we would fill all of our bottles and take an extra 3 liters back to the campsite. So we had something to do a little bit of washing with, food with, rehydrate, rehydrate food and ourselves. Like I said, to be able to wash up. So it was nice. We didn't have to filter that time.
Yeah, you can't beat that.
Yeah.
So you were able to build, I'm assuming if you're cooking food and all, you are able to build fires in these permitted camping areas. Like, so you could boil water if you had to cook food, or you can't, there's no fire building.
Yeah, so that's a great question. In these, there is no fire building.
Okay.
For kind of the same reasons that they don't want you to in a lot of the parks now. They don't want you, one, it's a fire hazard. They don't want it to accidentally spread, But the other one is they don't want you consuming a scarce resource where they're hoping that wood will drop and the animals will either make use of it, or it'll reabsorb and help create more healthy soil for the plants to continue to grow.
Yeah.
And just kind of naturally compost there. So we did take in a backpacking stove with the little propane tanks attached to the bottom of them. They're super lightweight, and so we can boil water that way. Our typical strategy is to not cook food in pots, to only reheat food in external packaging. So if we take a backpacking meal in, we've got it in like a Mylar bag or whatever it came in from the store, dump the boiling water and seal it, and then eat it right out of there. Because then when you're done, your bowl just folds up and goes into your garbage and you pack it out. And you don't have to wash out a dish and splash food all over the ground, which will just draw animals eventually into campsites. And, once they become a nuisance, they have to be euthanized. So, it just helps. It becomes less of a problem for the park people and keeps the campsites more sanitary. Yeah. So that's what we did. We used those little camp stoves and fired them up. You're boiling water in like 3 minutes. And it does take about 15 to 20 minutes to rehydrate a hearty meal. But in the meantime, you're tinkering with stuff around camp,
Yeah.
trying to make sure your bed's going to be comfortable, or you're adjusting for the weather that's going to come, or maybe that's the time you finally just spend some time reading a book, or, get clean maybe.
Yeah.
So maybe that's always nice if you got the ability to get clean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about when it comes to if you were to boil that brackish water?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't believe it ever gets completely clean to drink. Or like, how long does that process usually take?
So, I'm sure someone has devised a way to do this, because there's plenty of survivalists and preppers that are out there. They're like, hey, well, in the worst case scenario, you got a salt water. You're going to distill this using a bunch of tin cans and some old radiator plumbing or something.
Yeah.
But the truth is that if you're just putting this brackish or straight ocean water into a pot and you boil, well, you're going to boil off all the water. You'll be left with just continuously more salty water,
Mm-hmm.
right? So people that try it are just going to actually take the water in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to have a way to capture that water vapor, let it condense, and then pick that up again. There are other ways to do it. When I was in a military youth group that was led by the Marine Corps, I wasn't actually considered part of the military. I was like 10 years old, and we would do survival type training and different things. And one of the things we would do is, I'll give you an example. The first time I went out with them, they said, Fred, bring a tarp, a blanket, and a small pocket knife. And that's all you're going to bring for 3 days. And we ate roots and caught food, and we were miserable for 3 days, but we learned how to live off the land. And one way of finding fresh water that will work virtually anywhere, including in desert areas, is to dig a pit, suspend something that has a fairly flat, non-porous surface then put a little cup in the bottom of the pit, suspend something over that, and then weight it around the edges. So you basically have a film over the hole that is then held down so the film doesn't just collapse in. Then you put something with just a little bit of weight in the middle of that film that'll dimple it. So the dimple is pointed down towards the cup in the hole. That will build up a humidity in a pit like that, and the water will condense on that film or whatever you use. We used a section of tarp for doing this, and the water will gather at that little dimple, then slowly drip down into the cup. So could we have done something like that? Oh yeah, we could have done that, but we would have been drinking a tablespoon at a time.
Yeah.
So it works better in certain climates than others, but I've been told it works. You can do it practically in any desert and it'll work. But you're talking about a very slow source of water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't usually have that much time.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in need of water.
Right.
Right. You gotta start early.
Yeah. So there's creative ways to do it, but those creative ways aren't really efficient. A lot of times you should just get your butt out of whatever trouble you're in and find a normal source of water again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably the best route.
Yeah.
Speaking of trying to just get out of the trouble or get out of the situation you're in, is there anything that you didn't plan for that happened, or maybe you wish you planned better on this trip?
So the footwear was one for me.
Mm-hmm.
Should have really just worn the water socks. I think that would have helped prevent any sort of burning, or at least minimize that, which ultimately wasn't the big problem. The big problem for me was the blisters.
Yeah.
Just letting a more proper water footwear for that amount of time we spent out there.
Yeah, I think I definitely overpacked. So I brought definitely more than what I needed. I do that. I tend to do that on all these trips because I think I'll need these certain things, and then I just don't end up using them. Especially with clothes, I always end up bringing more clothes than I need because I think I'm gonna want to be comfortable or wear this different thing at this specific time, and that just doesn't happen because you're out there and you're dirty and you're just doing things and you're going, and so oftentimes you don't put on that extra shirt because you're just gonna go back out and sweat again.
Right.
So yeah, I think I definitely overpacked, and that can be a little frustrating because then you just got extra weight.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I packed. I'd like to say it's too much clothes. It felt that way, but in hindsight, had it gotten colder, it would have been nice to have it. That's part of that trade-off there. About how prepared do you really want to be, and how much stuff you really want to have to carry, and what's the risk that you absolutely have to have a certain item. So had we been out there and we suddenly got a weird storm that blew in and the temperature dropped 40 degrees and we're soaking wet, I probably would have wanted some more warmer clothes, but we didn't really get there. We also didn't have rain while we were out there.
Oh,
So
nice.
packing a raincoat, which I did just in case it rained. I'm like, okay, maybe I just want to stay dry because perhaps it's right before I go to bed, and that never ended up needing it. But, there's trade-offs. You're like, oh, what do I really need? What don't I need? And and I almost always take too many pairs of socks, because I don't want to have wet feet, and I want to be able to sleep comfortably. So I almost always end up bringing back a couple of unused pairs of socks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds pretty successful then. There's no, other than the water socks, sounds pretty without error.
I think it went to plan really well. Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully the kind of trips that most people would have. You take a look at where you're going, you plan right, and things go well. And sometimes things don't go well. It could be a lack of planning or just the situation is things that are out of your control drive it that way.
Yeah.
And but most of the time, I think for most people, these trips do go really well. Yeah, I was happy with it.
What would you say that your best memory from this trip was, like the standout moment, if there is one?
I would say my favorite moment was definitely when we went out on the beach at night and we were just out there by ourselves and all we had was the sound of the waves and all the tiny crabs on the beach and looking up and being able to see the stars clearly because you're out there and there's no pollution, so little pollution. But yeah, that for me was definitely one of my favorite moments because I just got to really enjoy it and take it in.
Yeah, it's almost rare now that I was talking about that the other day with somebody that like you don't really get to look up and see stars that much, like in a heavily populated area because of the pollution. Like you got to really get lucky with a very clear night, and then when you finally do notice it, it's kind of like you're taken aback by it almost. Like, this is amazing. Like wish it was like that all the time.
Yeah, we don't get into enough of those situations, and we've been in some pretty remote areas, and if you have a town a couple miles away, you'll get spillover, that light pollution that goes up, and it's probably a mostly harmless type of pollution unless you're talking about birds or something trying to migrate and throwing them off, but it's one of those things that does take away that experience, and that's an experience that humans have been having for thousands and thousands of years of looking up and seeing the stars, and suddenly it's kind of gone. And it's weird how that is now the rare thing to see, which was something that was a daily thing to see back then.
Yeah.
It's now been removed from our cycle, our natural cycle. And getting out and seeing those, it can actually throw you off your feet. When we were up in the Wind River Range and you'd just stand and look up, and that was a place that was very high up and very isolated from nearby towns, and it was dizzying. You look up and it was like, what do you focus on? And the whole world just starts to spin.
Yeah.
And our eyes and our brain aren't used to that anymore. Yeah. We did have some great stars while we were down there. My favorite moment on that trip was definitely also on the beach. I think it was our second night down there, and we had gotten back to camp fairly early, had dinner, and then knew we just got time to chill, and it was still light out. So we went over to the beach, and it was low tide, so we had lots of width of the beach and plenty of sand to do whatever in. And I noticed Dan was drawing in the sand, and I was like, okay, I could do that too. And I started drawing, just using our feet or our hands, putting images in. And Dan had drawn a piano, and I started drawing a turtle and a sun, and then I drew a Grateful Dead Steely, and Dan's over there drawing some more stuff. And then I went full Bob Ross on it. And did mountains with happy clouds and a babbling brook, and it was silly. Honestly, it was just fun play, and I think we did that for close to an hour. And that just that stands out because they just don't have those kind of opportunities very often to just play, and to relax. And so often when we do things, we're like, okay, we're going to plan out what we're doing, or often, the thing that we're doing is just relaxing. Okay, we're going to go and just shut down, and that doesn't become play necessarily either. And in this case, just having that extra free time to goof around and see what each other was doing. And, you look back on that, man, it's probably been a couple years since we actually spent any appreciable amount of time where we didn't have an agenda or we were going from one place to another, and like just actually sitting or staying in one spot and doing something fun, actual play. And I really thought that was cool, and And Dan is, he's going to be an adult on his own, fairly soon. And those times as father-son get further and further apart. So I really appreciated that. That was, it was not planned,
Yeah.
This was the beauty of it, right? It wasn't planned, and it just happened. And it was a great memory and quite a lot of fun right in the moment. So made me realize that the way that I like to hyper plan a lot of our trips, maybe I should allow more just downtime.
Mhm.
I mean, we are known for we're getting up the crack of dawn. We're moving all day long.
Yeah.
We stop to eat, to rehydrate, grab more water, maybe to enjoy the view, but then we get moving again. And we almost always, and Dan, I bet you'd agree with me on this. We almost always pull into a campsite like right as the sun's going down, and then we're in a rush to set up the campsite, make food, and then, we're exhausted and we pass out, And now I'm thinking, man, I got to figure out ways to build in more time because you're giving up something by just allowing downtime.
Yeah.
But I think it needs to be built into it. After experiencing that, it made me very aware that I think that needs to be built into it.
Yeah, that's amazing, especially if it became your favorite moment. It's like we should try but it's like then you get to the point where if you try and force that time, then it's like, might lose its luster a little bit.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, because you can't really force it. You just got to allow a space for something to happen.
Yeah.
In worst case is what? You're bored, but you're getting to look around someplace pretty cool, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you just take it in and enjoy the scenery for a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how those moments of like, it's like to you it becomes such a beautiful moment. Like I have a 1-year-old son, and for his birthday he got just like this plastic slide. And it was just me and him playing with it. And like he's trying to learn how to go down the top, and I'm pushing him down it, and he's laughing. And like I had that kind of like, I don't know if you had this in the moment, but in that moment I had this kind of like out of body realization of like how amazing this moment is. Like I'll never forget like that time and those moments that I spent with him.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of a cool thing when you can step back and really appreciate something where it's just like we're just doing this.
Yeah.
We had no plans, like we're just hanging out in the living room and this is just what's going on.
Yeah.
There's no like it doesn't have to end. It wasn't something that's like, okay, now we're gonna go play before you go to bed. It was just like a thing.
Right.
And it's amazing. It's an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and you had a good point. You can't really force that kind of stuff. But
right.
And in that moment, I was just enjoying the moment. I wasn't even thinking about it until afterwards. And I was like, holy smokes, what did I just do? What was going on there? And not that what we did was so overly complicated or hard to make happen, but it was something that was different and not usual. And yeah, I wish it would happen more often, but that's kind of life, isn't it?
Yeah.
And raising kids. And, I'm not sure how old your little guy is now, but, yeah, you'll want those moments more and more, especially as you see him get older and you're like, oh man, it's going to be less and less time to do them.
Yeah.
When Dan was born, and this is something, I don't know why I'm telling your listeners this because it's something I told almost nobody, but when Dan was born, like in the moment after he was born, he's sitting on this table and they're putting that silver stuff in his eyes, all that process right there. I'm looking at this baby on this stand and like his life and my life and the parallels are suddenly flashing through my mind. And it became so totally overwhelming as like, I'm thinking about all the things I have to do as a father, all the times that I want to be his friend, but can't necessarily be his friend. And I have to be that father figure and about like how like ultimately he's going to have to go his own way in life. Here's a kid born minutes.
You're right.
And all of that is flashing in front of my head and I'm seeing the limitedness of it, and it was overwhelming emotionally. And like, it was one of the most profound moments of my life as far as like having something that intense happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love my girls and I had different experiences with both of them, coming into our lives, but that was very unique. And now seeing him growing up, and he's 17, now he's gonna be 18 in a few months, and knowing, hey, we're right there already, So
yeah.
I'm grateful actually for the hiking in a lot of this because that's created opportunities for talking, for spending one-on-one together for literally hours,
Yeah.
and often without any distraction in that. So, and I don't mean to belittle this at all, but some fathers, some things are like, well, we're going to go and watch a sport. So they go and they watch a sport and it's something else happening in front of them that they pay attention to. And they talk about that thing happening in front of us.
Yeah.
in front of them. And I'm grateful that the hiking, for at least in our situation, became okay. We're talking about what we're doing, what we've done, and what we'd like to do in the future, and then we intertwine the reasons why and how these things relate to the rest of our lives. It becomes a little bit more than something that's just external to us. It is about us, and that the hiking and that outdoors aspect of it is probably the most important piece to me. I love the sport of it, the physicality of it, but that's the most important piece to me, is that ability to bond. And I've gotten there, with other members of the family in different ways, but I think he and I have been able to embrace that the most.
Yeah. You got so much time to, maybe you're just like moving and you've got something on your mind, and maybe right at that moment you're like, I'm not going to save this, but then you've got so many hours where you keep mulling it over and you're like, okay, well, let's enter that next level of depth of talking. And then, you just keep going through these different doorways and levels of what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And for solo hikers, that's also a benefit too, because you'll do that mentally. You don't have a screen in front of you. Yeah, you might be checking your map app or something like that, but there's not that external distraction. Your body kind of kicks in and helps you navigate the trail and jump over everything. And you're not super analyzing what you're walking through, but you're taking it in. And at the same time, it's like you're processing what the stuff that's been sitting around in your mind is just popping in, and you're going, oh, well, maybe I need to look at that differently, or, maybe there's a different way to do that. And you just process more stuff in your head when you're hiking on a trail like that. I used to find it really therapeutic. Dan, you get that when you run? Do you have like the mental process going on, or does it become a different type of mental game than what I'm describing?
It's about the same, like what you're saying. Yeah, I think that's a big part of the reason why I like running so much, is because when I'm out there, I am just going, step by step, quite literally, and I don't know, I feel like I'm really, really working with myself rather than fighting a lot of my thoughts, because you're running through it, you're fighting off different pains, you're actively kind of going through the paces there.
Yeah. So, that's true. You're getting a lot more and a lot faster physical pushback from the activity than you do in a hiking situation, where it doesn't get as physically demanding. It's not as much of a mind game until you maybe have a really long day or have to go through a difficult area or terrain.
Yeah, that's where I see a lot of that. It just helps me clear my head, because I'm out there, and sometimes, like, if I'm not running with anyone else, then it's just me. And so when like I start hurting or other kinds of things, it can be some work, because you've really gotta just about working with yourself. And then a lot of the times I see that then come to me after the run too, is that I'm working with myself more instead of fighting your thoughts or that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's cool. I have a friend she's about to run a marathon, and I've run one before, and I was trying to give her advice on like what to do, and she was like, I just ran my second half marathon, and on mile 9, I was telling myself, like, there's no way I can make it through a full marathon. And I was like, you can make it through a full marathon. Your body can withstand a full marathon. It's your mind that you have to go to war with, pretty much. Like,
right.
The battle it's all in your mind. Like, I was trying not to give her like that place that you get to, but like, to me, the race starts at mile 20. Like, when you get there, now it's really on. Like, the last 6 miles are extremely intense. They're very emotional. It's like that same kind of, like, even like you talked about, just like the mental game of, when you're hiking, or if something's going wrong, or trying to keep it all together in your mind to get to your destination is extremely important.
Right. Like, you have to end up working with yourself in order to get done, because
logically, you're safe, but your body's sending all kinds of distress signals.
Like, please stop. Or you're like, we can't stop.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different when you're just running a marathon for sport. Like, you could stop if you really had to. And like, there are times when you probably should. I saw some pretty wild stuff out on the course of like people just like up and getting injured out of nowhere. I mean, at that point, if you sustain an injury, obviously you should be done. You should just keep going. Yeah, interesting, like, thought process, how it applies to everything. The mental strength and preparedness for literally anything that you do.
We had a moment on this trip that I was not prepared for mentally. And the only thing I could do is say, hey, I've got to make it through.
Mhm.
And it was actually after we had left the beach and we came back and we stopped in the Shenandoah National Park. And we had pre-planned and bought some backcountry passes for an area you have to have passes to get into. It's not like you can just get into the park and then go hike this trail. You got to have permits because it takes you up a pretty rigorous, 4 mile straight up climb. And then once you get up there, you're going through like a rock scramble and big boulders and things you got to be able to get up onto or squeeze between or even drop down between really narrow spots much further than most people would be used to or comfortable with dropping just and falling, And we got up in there and like I heard, oh yeah, it's challenging and it's tough and we've had to carry people off the mountain. And I'm like, yeah, but like it can't be that hard. It's open to the public, right? You don't have to take safety gear. And when we got up in there and I found out I was still afraid of heights to a certain extent, and we're like on ledges and you're looking down like 8 feet down and going, okay, I've got an area that's the size of like half a laptop that I'm going to be able to put my feet on halfway down and then somehow try to figure out how to like press my back against one side of this rock wall and leverage off this little pad with my feet on it and then drop another 4 feet.
Wow.
You're like doing these Spider-Man climbs down in these wedged areas. And oh my gosh, what a mental game that was. It was like, no, you just have to go forward. And after you get past one of these, you realize if you try to go back, it's going to be just as dangerous anyways.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, either go forward or, they call a rescue squad and that's, 10 grand out of my pocket to get off the mountain,
Yeah.
And that was really fulfilling to get through all of that. There were some spots where the mental game was just so tough. It was like, just do it. Just trust your body, trust the movement, look at it, don't overthink it. And I'm an overthinker, so that was a constant trap.
Yeah, it was tough because you gotta think you could be seconds away from having one of those like disaster scenarios going on.
Yeah.
So it was.
Yeah,
it was difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, or jumping even over like a 2.5 foot crack in the ground. You think, 2.5 feet, I can jump over that all day. Well, I'm running on slippery rock and jumping from a big slippery boulder to another big slippery boulder. In that 2.5 foot crack, that drops down about 20 feet in there. So if I slip on either side, I'm going in the hole, know? And that is, it's a whole other thing when you're looking at that hole versus just reading about it online.
Yeah, or jumping 2.5 feet when you're standing on solid ground and somebody measured it. They're like, 3 feet. You made it. You completely cleared it.
Yeah. And, in hindsight, what I thought was 2.5 feet might have been 1.5 feet, but it was once you saw it, that hole looks a lot bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, the result, if it goes wrong, is much, much different.
Yeah.
But the reward at the end of all of it, like you said, when you were done or anything like that, or racing or whatever, like that payoff at the end when you did it, and it's like it was a strenuous or stressful, like mentally taxing, that feeling it's unparalleled.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is very amazing. Yeah, and we did. We got the payoff at the end. We found where other people were getting up to the top of this mountain by taking like an 8 mile hike up a very slow trail.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that's how we went down. But once we got up there, like it felt like we did this the right way, and we did the whole thing, And we finally found one of the boulders that was the very top of that mountain peak. It was cool. And sitting up there, you could basically see in 360 degrees for about 20 miles. So
wow,
it's a pretty neat perch we found.
Yeah. So back to on your beach trip. On our last podcast, Valley Food Storage had sent you some meals to take with you guys and to test out.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious as to what you guys ate and what you thought.
So what we took with us on this trip was the fettuccine Alfredo, and we took the oatmeal. There was an apple cinnamon and I believe a strawberry oatmeal.
Mm.
And we also had dehydrated bananas. And the way we did the fettuccine Alfredo is we added, like, you can get those foil packs of chicken, and you can also get foil packs of tuna where they don't put them in the can anymore. You just rip the package open. So that's the way we ate it, is we added chicken to it. So because it's just adding some extra protein. So we mixed that up, and we'd actually repackaged it before we even left the house, because those kits actually make a very sizable meal. It's enough for like 5 people. And so instead, what we took is these, you can just buy individual Mylar bags to be able to cook in like we do, where we boil the water, just pour it right in. And so we pre-packed in predictable meal sizes so we knew how much water to pour in. So once we got out there, we each had our own meals. boiled that water, put it in there. I put a little bit of extra salt and a little bit of red pepper flake in mine too with the chicken, just because I had an idea of what it was going to taste like and wanted it, and it was good. It was very filling. It rehydrated just, pretty much like any other food we've been used to rehydrating on the when you get out there. It takes a little bit longer than you might expect, but really not too long. Typically you start smelling that and you're like, I want to eat it now.
Yeah.
And it smelled pretty good. It was a tiny bit like, maybe this has to do with wilderness preparation versus stovetop preparation. It was a tiny bit watery, but really it was, once you threw the extra chicken in, it wasn't bad. It was just, I noticed it was a little bit watery than, maybe had we made it on the stovetop with intense heat, that would have absorbed a different way, or maybe the sauce would have thickened a little bit differently. But it was good. And the oatmeals, they rehydrated just fine. And ate those, and they actually included a little bit of extra sugar in those, which was great for the energy and that morning carb kick. Yeah. Which piece did you? I know you ate about all of that, didn't you? Or did you skip the oatmeal?
So I didn't have any of the oatmeal, but I did have the fettuccine.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a good meal. I think that was our first dinner, I think.
Yeah.
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 Oh, yeah. The smell from those bags at the end of the day is always. You always want to get into it before it's finished hydrating.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty pungent when it's like right when it starts cooking.
Yeah.
But it's got to be nice to have like a hot meal at the end of a strenuous long day of activity versus just like, I'm going to eat a cold Pop-Tart and drink some water or something like that.
Right. Well, yeah. To be able to get, something like an actual complex meal into your stomach it's reassuring, it's comforting, it feels like a little bit part of a familiar ritual. It helps you calm down a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's often more than just the nutrition of it, and that was really, it was good. Yeah, I think that's really what that is. It's more the ritual than anything else, because you were kind of saying you can eat anything you want during the day. I mean, heck, you could just, we stopped at a bakery before we went, and it was one of the things we ended up taking too much food was we loaded up on like gourmet pastries. And I was, one of the days we were out was my birthday, and I was like, I'm going to pig out, and I still couldn't eat everything we took, but like I was eating like handfuls of like gourmet chocolate chip cookies, and it really having a great time with that. But you could do that all day long. But there is something about that ritual, that calming down of it, the reassurance of it, and because who wants to eat a bar every meal of the day,
So it always gets old.
Yeah. Just sit there chewing on some dense bar. They're great, but not all 3 meals a day.
And it's over pretty quick. Like, I guess it's the same thing. Like the ritual, it requires no utensils, no sitting down, and even like the feeling of warm food in your stomach versus just like cold, mashed granola is like kind of help you sleep.
Yeah.
Just a better feeling overall.
Yeah. And it probably shouldn't be overlooked too that there's water in these. We're adding the water, so you're getting another way to rehydrate. So you eat a bar, and then you're like rehydrating it in your gut. You're almost drinking enough water just so it can digest, not necessarily to add a lot of extra water into your body,
Yeah.
And with those, you're still drinking to wash it down on top of all the water you've inserted into the food, And it's a good way to help your body get that extra water, and get it distributed to where you can have the energy for the next day.
Well, it's great. I'm glad you guys enjoyed them.
Yeah. Those banana chips were good too. Those were, a lot better than like if you eat just dehydrated, because those are freeze dried. And if you get dehydrated bananas, they're typically coated in sugar. They taste a little bit like banana, and they're hard, And those bananas that we got from them, they were like crispy but not, or crunchy, and they still had a really good sweet banana flavor to them. It wasn't like there was no artificial sweetener. I read the back; it was just banana, but it was sweet banana, and it wasn't like they had to add sugar or honey or anything extra to it. It was the good natural sweetness, and sometimes that is hard to get because natural sugar can be a preservative, and I'm sure that's part of the reason they put it on these dehydrated foods. But that was a game changer as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
With being able to eat fruit, because it was darn near as good as eating it fresh. Yeah.
Yeah, it almost like it can, if you just set it on your tongue and let it sit in your mouth, like as it rehydrates, it almost like melts away, kind of.
Yeah. Or you get that little bit of a mushy feeling like you would with a banana.
Yeah.
You ate a soft banana. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Yeah.
So what is the next trip? What's next on the docket for you guys?
We don't know for sure.
Yeah.
So we're getting back to school. It's almost ready to start up again. And we got a 3-day holiday weekend coming up.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at that going, hey, can we get out and do something during that weekend? Or, which is sometimes a tough weekend and do like anything camping related because people like flood out on those weekends.
Yeah.
But I know some places that are isolated enough, and I'm just debating with his work schedule, and his his cross country schedule. Can we get out and do something? So if we do, it'll be close by. We're going to hit somewhere kind of isolated in central PA or get back down to Monongahela in West Virginia, something where you can get down in a few hours and not use the whole trip traveling back and forth.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Or it may just need to be a series of like day hikes, like go somewhere, and even if we don't camp, be able to just get somewhere really cool so we can hit some trails during the day.
Yeah.
Really want to do that. And then, sky's the limit. We keep talking about going back out west, and that would be great to do next year, going back. I'd like to see Utah and Wyoming, but, I'd be happy just doing Wyoming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you guys, hopefully you guys get back out there, and then maybe wherever you end up going, we can have you back on and we can cover that one too.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're well over an hour now, so we'll wrap it up. I just want to say thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. It was great talking with you guys. You're an amazing storyteller, and we love having you. So I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah,
This is fun.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Fred and Daniel. Fred is a very experienced backpacker and hiker, so there's a lot of great nuggets in there that you can take and apply to your own trips. And as you noticed, they took some Valley food storage with them. And if you'd like to get some of that clean, nutritious food, like the banana slices or the strawberry slices, you can get 15% off your next order with the code PRACTICAL15 at checkout. That's PRACTICAL15. And you can take 15% off your entire order. My name is Nick. Thank you so much for listening to Practical Prepper Podcast, and we'll see you next time.